Welcome to the Three Principles Global Community September webinar. The Three Principles Global Community, or 3PGC, is a nonprofit organization that's committed to bringing an understanding of the three principles to people throughout the world. If you're joining us live and you have any questions, you can type them into the Q&A box on the right-hand side of this screen. So today we have Jan Chipman of Vantage Consulting Group, Inc. Jan is a human relations consultant from Salt Spring Island, British Columbia. Jan and her husband and business partner Chip were mentored by Sydney Banks from 1975 until 2009. They hosted many executive and couples retreats with him in North America and Europe. For 24 years while in Florida, they served a wide variety of organizations throughout North America, from companies specializing in the hospitality industry to not-for-profit services, prisons, and substance abuse centers. They currently enjoy sharing their understanding of the three principles from Salt Spring Island through international speaking engagements, retreats, teleconferences, one-on-one Skype and telephone sessions, and through retreats for individuals and couples who come to the island seeking a deeper understanding of the principles and their own true nature. The Chipmans have seen countless people find happiness and flourishing relationships as their own wisdom emerges after being touched by original books and recordings of Sydney Banks. So welcome, Jan. Thank you so much, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you for having me here, Bonnie, and I'd like to thank the Three Principles Global Community also for inviting me to share today. They do an amazing amount of wonderful work, and their conferences have just been such a contribution to spreading the, all the beautiful things that Sydney Banks shared with us. So Chip and I appreciate them very much. So anyway, when I chose the topic for this talk, about the quiet mind, I was trying to distill everything I learned from Sid over the years, and that is the one that just keeps coming to my consciousness the most quickly is how much the fact that he was stressed so much the importance of a quiet mind. And before I met Sid, I didn't even know that my mind could be quieter. I excuse me, when I met Sid in 1975, my husband Chip and I were really struggling with our marriage, and we'd been married about 6 years, and we had a little son. Now we have a son and a daughter, but at the time we just had a little son, and I was so frightened because not only was I worried about losing my husband, I wondered what would happen with our little family unit. And basically what had happened was Chip and I had both gotten so caught up in wanting to have the perfect life, and not just live according to the way society had kind of nurtured us, or our parents had nurtured us. We thought there had to be more answers to life, and so we just got on this search, and we became so intent on not being ordinary and thinking that we had to be perfect, that and more spiritual, that we went the absolute opposite direction without even realizing it. We thought we were becoming more and more spiritual, but actually we were becoming more and more unhappy, more judgmental about ourselves and about the world. So we were part of that late 60s, early 70s kind of a syndrome where we have to fix society. And we didn't get that the society is just made up of all of us. So we were missing that piece. So what happened was I just spiraled down into like getting really unhappy, very insecure, physically not very healthy because the stress was taking its toll on me. Really struggling as a young mom and as a wife, wanting to be perfect. And so it got to the point where it was so I was so desperate that I was just unhappy most of the time. And still, we kept thinking that we were ahead of everybody else because we were on this spiritual search. So one day, through some friends, I met Sid Banks, and Sid had had his experience probably like a year or two before this. And so there were a very small group of people that had started to listen to him. And I found myself at Sid and his first wife, Barb, at their house with a few people that I didn't know. And I was just with some friends along for the ride. And Sid started, when I got there, I was introduced and I was very shy, but I just kind of sat there and just was waiting for our friends to take me away at the end of the day. But Sid was just making conversation with people in the room, and it was a little social kind of gathering, maybe 10 people or something. And but then all of a sudden it got really quiet, and Sid started talking in the way that you hear him talk in his books and in his videos, and just talking like really calmly and saying these beautiful spiritual facts. And as he taught, I just got this calmer feeling. Before that, I'd been a little bit, anxious and insecure about meeting new people. So as I sat there and I heard these words, that the way he was talking and the calmness and the confidence that he had just kind of just drew me in. And all of a sudden, what I was hearing was facts. Like he probably was talking about that, the universe is all like one energy, and everything comes from one divine energy, and that kind of thing. But as I sat there, everything that he said rang true. And so I couldn't argue with anything. It was just like there was one truth after another truth after another truth. And so all of a sudden it just dawned on me that this sounds like all the essence of all the wisdom I've ever heard in all my learning through life. And what really hit me was those wise people that I've always admired were always saying, you need to look inside yourself. And so for that instant, it just hit me that if that was true, that wisdom wasn't coming from this person that was talking. It had to be already in me. And that was the first time I really ever in my whole life felt that connection, that the wisdom is already in me. And I'd been looking to everybody else for wisdom. And so as I felt that, it just brought this calm feeling. And then shortly after that, he said something like, and he looked over at me and he was looking at me and he said, if everybody in this room could see how much beauty and goodness and everything good is already inside them, they'd have all the happiness they could ever want. And in that split second, I honestly felt, and not just a feeling, I knew that my whole life ahead of me was going to be beautiful. And even my marriage, including my marriage. And it was just like this, it's like a metaphor now, but it felt like there was this path in front of me and I didn't know what the details would be, but I knew I was going to have a happy rest of my life. And that, it's just the most powerful thing that ever happened to me, because that was 40 years ago. And this past summer is 40 years. And since that moment, I have been having that happy life. And not only that, it's gotten even more happy as time goes on. And I go through the same ups and downs as everybody. It's part of the human experience. But that was just, to me, that's the most powerful part of this story, is that in a split second, a person could go from like being a really unhappy person whose life was just falling apart, then in the next moment their life takes a whole different turn and starts turning into beauty. And so something is in all of us, that any of us can have that at any moment. I really believe that. And so when I went home and shared this with my husband, he wasn't ready to hear it. You know, he didn't have that moment that I just had. But it wasn't very long after that Chip actually had an insight as well that showed him that he could have that happiness too. And so to me, it's so profound that here were two miserable, unhappy people who were spreading that wave of misery around them, and we were mostly connecting with people that were unhappy as well. That was where we felt comfortable. And all of a sudden, we're noticing these happy starting to connect with them. And so our world started to change on the outside. Like the first change was on the inside, but then I saw my life change so dramatically within months, where everything, like where we lived, who we spent time with, how we treated each other, how our son, his feelings, you know, he became more happy. I mean, we really started living in a whole new world in a very brief time. And as time went on, things started to happen to us that showed us that all our dreams, not only were our dreams coming true for each other and, you know, having a happy marriage and everything, but our occupation changed. We both eventually started working together to share what we learned about how everybody has that potential for happiness inside them and that potential for well-being. We became sought after to be able to share that, and eventually that led to working in corporations and in prisons, women prisons, and rehabilitation centers, and it's still ongoing. I mean, now we live on Salt Spring, and we work mostly from Salt Spring, and except for some occasional speaking engagements and retreats that we host or are invited to participate in. But it's still evolving. I mean, the more that we keep learning ourselves, the more we are called upon to share what we learned. So getting back to my topic, which is the quiet mind, even though I said that over the years, life just keeps getting nicer and that happiness keeps increasing, because we're still learning about those three principles that Sydney Banks shared. There have been times when things kind of plateaued, and I would start to just notice that there's more stress in my life than there should be. Like I think, well, I'm still getting worried about things. My thoughts are often about things that could go wrong. You know, like I'm sure everybody experiences this sometimes. You wake up in the middle of the night or you wake up in the morning, and what comes into your head is all the things you have to do and a lot of reasons why they won't get done, or they haven't, you haven't been keeping up with things. And so that stress is kind of on the edge, waiting to come in and color your perception of life. And I noticed that starting to happen. And I realized that as much as we still talk about SID in our work and the three principles, I had forgotten how important it is for me to keep listening to Sid's materials or reading his materials. Because the first insight I had came when I was listening to somebody that's Sydney Banks, who had that a way bigger insight than I had. Like he actually saw in an instant, he saw what and felt what universal oneness, the oneness of life. He experience that completely. And we're, as we listen to Sid or learn about the three principles, we're getting little tastes of that. And a little taste can change your life. It can change so many things in your life. But to me, when I started to realize that I hadn't really been listening as much as I thought I had to that purest source that I know of listening to the three principles. And so I started to make that my priority. And the way I look at it, when I get up and start my day, I have a choice. I can just go right to my computer and with my cup of tea and start work and start connecting with people all over the world and and who are in different time zones. Or I could take that beginning of my day to just listen to someone who knew the real, what life is really made up of, who taught us about the three principles. And when I talk about listening to Sid, what I really mean is, I feel that when I'm listening to that purest way of talking about the principles and that universal oneness and true self, I feel like I'm listening to myself. And I feel like I'm giving myself the option to really learn who I really am on the inside and who we all really are. And what happened was I started to just trust that if I start my day with a little bit of quiet, even if I have to get up a little bit early, and just get to know my true self by having that, quieter mind before all the thoughts of work and interactions with people before that starts. And what happened was, the first time I started reading or listening in the morning, all these thoughts would be going through my head, and I'd have to start the recording over again or read the page over again, because my mind was so busy with all these seductive thoughts, about I need to be doing this, all the responsibilities, or thinking about things that have been bothering me about other people or circumstances and worries. And as I started to listen to the talks about what life really is, like what we see on the outside looks so real, but we're changing it from moment to moment with the way we're perceiving it. As I started to listen to that, I started to realize that I was doing way too much thinking, and that my mind had gotten so busy that those beautiful feelings that I had started to experience when I first heard Sid talk about the principles, they weren't coming through as much in my life. And this was even like just a couple years ago. And just the feeling that comes when you're with somebody, a friend or, family. And then as my mind got quieter, I started to see that those feelings started to come back. And so it's not like a ritual for me. It's an acknowledgement that if I really want to get to know that true self and not get caught up in my personal self and my perceptions of my faults and my habits, then if I just keep going back to that, what I call the default setting, like that place inside all of us where there's calm, there's joy, there's forgiveness, there's everything beautiful, and that's what I first heard when I heard Sid. Is I heard who I really am is way more beautiful than what I'd been thinking I was. And so I feel like I keep getting a refresher of that first message. Like I really feel like there's no new insight. It's like that same insight is coming back to me, speaking in a different way, to match what my life has turned into. So it keeps adapting, you know. And so I honestly think when we have an insight, we get this beautiful feeling, and it makes sense. Life makes sense, but then we have to go back and relive those experiences of life from that new way of understanding life. So I feel like life is unfolding to me over and over again. Like I'll have the same interactions with my family, but every time I revisit those interactions, because I'm seeing from a new level of consciousness, they're getting more and more beautiful. And even on days they may not be as beautiful as other days, we all have days where it's just off. You know, we don't feel connected to our true self or other people, and when we feel stressed or tired. Even on those days, there's that knowing, like once you've seen what life really is, and you've gotten that, you know, even the littlest insight, there's a knowing even when you're having a bad time, that it's temporary and it's not real, that you get, like, you keep building your foundation of knowing your true self. That's what I feel like. I feel like what's happening is there's a stronger and stronger connection with my true self, like all the beauty and the joy that's inside. And to me, that's like everybody, if everybody could have that gift, I think the world would change way faster. You know, it may be changing a little bit, but like, and I know that I've talked about this so many times when I've shared with people, but when Chip and I worked in a women's prison in Tampa, we basically and we shared this with Sid at the time, and we actually went in there at his encouragement. So it was a gift for us. So at the time, we decided that we wanted to give those women the most pure experience of learning about the principles that we possibly could. And so when we went in there, because we had carte blanche, we could talk about whatever we want. We were set free to go in and do these classes whatever way we wanted. So we didn't have to fit into a corporation's business model or any kind of strategy, whatever. We just went in and we shared our story, and we were able to have Sid's materials in the library. And so what those women were exposed to was our story of hearing this for ourselves, and then Sid's materials. And so what we wanted to do was we wanted them to have the opportunity to have what we had when we first met Sid, was to hear it in its purest form, to hear about the principles in their purest form. And what we saw was the most amazing thing, because the women, for number one, when we told them, the same way we heard from Sid, that if you could see all that goodness inside you and all that beauty, you'd have all the happiness you could ever want. And so you can imagine women in a prison having someone tell them that, when all they thought of themselves was they were bad people, they'd messed up, and most of them, honestly, probably 90%, couldn't even conceive of thinking they were a good person. You know, like a lot of them had started to learn that through their faith, or just had some common sense in there still. But for the most part, it was like we were talking, like we were from another planet. Like, how could you think that I have goodness in me? But the beautiful part is that it just took like one or two women to catch on to that and change and realize, yeah, like I am a good person, and I can be happy even though I'm here in prison. Like it just like one or two at first was all it took, because it's the same way when Sid started talking, there were one or two people, and then there were three or four. But it's the example of somebody seeing someone change. That's what happened to me. I saw some people that have been listening to Sid start to change and be happy. And at first, I didn't want that because I had a feeling that it had to be more of a serious search. So it was too simple that people were just becoming happy. Well, in the prison, when a couple women started to become happy, there were skeptics around them who were saying, "Oh, you can't be happy, and here, look at the way they're treating us or whatever, and you shouldn't stop being vigilant about yourself." So some of the women were skeptical, but as more of the women started to catch on, and they were reading Sid's books, The Enlightened Gardener was the most powerful one of all. They were reading that, and Second Chance, but the Enlightened Gardener was really helpful because most of these women had been in therapy, some of them since they were like 6 years old, and now they're in their some of them in their late 50s. And so they were all of a sudden reading a book that talked about therapy from a whole different perspective, and talked about alcoholism and drug addiction from a whole different perspective by little stories of people who discovered that innocence in themselves. So as these women were reading The Enlightened Gardener, they started to see the innocence in themselves. And one of them said at one of the early sessions, and this woman had been in therapy since she was like 6 years old, 7 years old, because of an extremely traumatic event in her childhood. She's now 50, and she'd harbored all these feelings against her therapists for years because she felt so hurt by them trying to get her to relive that horrible experience that happened when she was a child, and she had other reasons. But when she said one day in the class, she said, in the book Enlightened Gardener, Mr. Banks talks about psychology and psychiatry as a field that's evolving. And so all the people that are sharing in their own way as therapists, it's what they've learned. And she said, and I'm not sure where this is in The Enlightened Gardener, but she said Mr. Banks says that it's an evolution, and they're just doing their best, but it will change. The field will change, and people will begin to see that we're healthy on the inside, that we're naturally healthy, and that it doesn't help to go back into the past. And this was her explaining what she saw. And she said, so I really see now that everybody's been trying to help me all these years, and I've been feeling resentful and unforgiving. And so she had found forgiveness, and it was the most, I'm trying to put into words something that was so very powerful. And it was what was really beautiful is she transcended from a woman who was just like a throwaway in society, right, stuck in a prison somewhere, and had been just really troubled and psychotic her whole life. And in that moment, she was teaching us. She was teaching us. And to me, that's the power of what Sid was pointing out to us. Like he said so often, he said, don't listen to me. Don't listen to my words. Listen to yourself. And to me, and he did talk about the quiet mind. He talked about that a lot. He even might have done a recording about that years ago. So what he was trying to say, and what we have as a gift to share in our work, is that the person to really listen to in life, you can read all the books and you can keep learning, but knowing all along that there really isn't anything to learn from anyone but yourself. And that the way that learning comes through, the way that wisdom comes through us, is when our minds quiet from those everyday details, and those compelling thoughts, the negative thoughts and the worry thoughts, when our mind just starts seeing those for what they are, and we stop fighting them. Like, I know another thing that I do, and most people do, is that we fight those thoughts. Like, we don't like it when we have negative thinking or when we're feeling angry or jealous. And so fighting them only digs us in deeper. And so Sid would say, just notice, notice the feeling. When you're feeling judging someone, or you're not getting along with someone, what does that feel like? And just see the difference. And he would say, when you start to see the difference, your common sense of wisdom is telling you, is pointing out the difference. So, in other words, our true self is always there. It never goes anywhere. All that beauty and joy never goes anywhere. And to me, that's the most amazing gift in the world. When our mind is quieter, it's revealed. When our mind gets busy, it's hidden. It's hidden in all those kind of superficial thinking.
And we do have one question.
Oh, great.
Elaine asked, the beautiful feeling that you're talking about, that comes from our thinking too, right? Or is that feeling not from thinking, but directly from mind? You want me to repeat it?
Yes, because I did miss a little bit of it.
Okay. The beautiful feeling that you're talking about, that comes from our thinking too, right? Or is that feeling not from thinking, but directly from mind?
Well, from my understanding, and I'm just putting in the word my best words to share what I learned from listening to Sid, but from my understanding, when you get that really beautiful feeling, like that feeling of love, and you can't really you know how some people say, well, how do you know when you have that feeling? Well, I'm talking about when you get a beautiful feeling and it wells up in you, and you just feel that connection with somebody, or you just look around and you're just in awe of a beautiful sunset, when I believe that feeling is coming from our true self. I mean, it's all coming from our true self ultimately, even when we think we're out of it and everything. But like my husband, Chip, when he talks, he always says, when you can't have a negative feeling without being caught up in your thoughts. But a beautiful feeling doesn't really require thought. So I know that we never stop thinking. As human beings, there's always thinking going on. But as she said, as Elaine said, and as you say, Elaine, out there, when I really believe that beautiful feeling is showing you the way to your true self, and showing what your true self, what it is, and so that you can identify with it even more. Because again, even when you're having a negative thought, ultimately all we are is the true self. So again, that beautiful feeling, you can trust in it. That when you're feeling that feeling, it's guiding you back inside to that essence, that spiritual essence. I hope that answers Elaine's question.
If anyone else has questions, there's a Q&A button that you can press on the left side of your screen, and it will pop up a Q&A section on the right. So please feel free to type in your questions.
How about you, Bonnie?
I loved what you were saying about the women in prison who had really been throwaway people, so to speak. And and just really got it. They just were able to see something different. And it changed everything. Nothing changed, but everything changed.
Yes.
It's so beautiful.
And you know, it's so interesting because again, like many people have heard Chip and I refer back to those experiences that we had talking to the women. And I mean, over the years, we've worked in corporations and we've worked as not-for-profits. We've worked individually with clients. We've worked with Sid, you know, hosting retreats and talking to executives. And so, but out of all those times, I think the fact that because we went somewhere where everybody was in really dire straits, it was like the perfect testing ground for how well the principles, learning about the principles makes a difference in people's lives, and how much Sid's materials make a difference, because that's all we used. It was us, and there was Sid's materials, and Sid came in and actually taught in the prison several times, and in a rehab center, he came in and taught to people who'd been addicted to drugs and, you know, labeled alcoholics and drug addicts. So that just the idea that you could take people that were so desperate and then actually learn from them, like that's what I felt the gift was for me, to be able to learn from somebody like that. Was inspiring to me. That was like watching somebody have that much courage to go from 0 to 60, you know, like total, not just feeling bad, but in the circumstances that they were in. Like I would drive away at the end of an evening of talking to these women, and I would just be just teary-eyed and just overwhelmed with how incredible that was, that they were singing and, you know, hugging us and singing in the sense of like when we got to have our graduation parties at the end of the 10 weeks, we had a little ceremony, and then they let us bring in, you know, Chip brought his guitar, and like they were, you know, joyful. But even on a regular night, when at the end of the night, we'd always play a video of Sid at the end. And we'd leave that room and these women were joyful, and they were sharing with each other. Like as I said, we started out with just a couple women who got it, and then the other women just started to see the change in them, and that had the ripple effect. And so there's these people that were living in like really challenging situations, a situation that I couldn't imagine living in. Like I was driving away, and I'd be going back to my home, and I didn't have to wear flip-flops in the shower, and I could just open my refrigerator and eat whatever I wanted, and I could be with my family, you know, not just a phone call, you know, one phone call or a visit once a week if you're lucky. It was like it just brought home to me how powerful. And so it was like the greatest gift to be able to learn from, just keep learning. And that, to me, that's another part of this whole thing, is that every time we think we know something, the paradox is we know everything on the inside. Ultimately, our true self knows everything. But the fact that we can just keep learning, like a couple years ago when I had to relearn how important it is to quiet my mind, because it had gotten ahead of me. It was racing off with me, and all these busy thoughts. I thought that was reality, and I thought it was perfectly healthy. But again, even after all those years, it was like starting over again and going back to when I first learned what Sid said about there's something so beautiful inside you that if you really listen to that, you'd have all that happiness. So I had to realize I have to rediscover that happiness, and I'm still learning it.
We have a couple more questions, Jan.
Okay.
I'm going to read a follow-up first from Elaine. She says, thanks, man. I appreciate your answer to my first question. Is it worthwhile to seek calmness through things like meditation or yoga, or is it best to just wait for it to happen?
What a great question. I love that question. The most beautiful thing is everybody has their own way of finding what they need in life. You know what I mean? It's like, and that's so beautiful, because for me, I love just sitting and having that quiet. To me, that's like a super luxury. And I think the best thing is to see the difference between an activity and just being inside yourself. You know, like you could be washing the dishes and just have the most beautiful, peaceful state of mind. And that's kind of the way I roll, you know. I love life. I love just doing the simple things in life. And so I don't kind of go off to activities as much as some people, but that's the way I am. And I know I have friends that they have different ways of finding that calmness. But to me, when there's too much activity, I think it can detract from the fact that you don't really need activity. So if you love the activity, that's beautiful. But the fact is, it's before you act. It's just being. It's just being is where you really find those beautiful feelings. And then the activity is just what we do as human beings. So I don't know if that answers the question, but I would say that for myself, when I'm trying to do too many things and I'm adding one more thing onto my, my things that I'm doing each day, then I end up getting tired and my mind gets busier. So I do notice that before I was, all my life, I tend to do too much or think too much about all the things I need to do. So whatever helps you get that feeling of peace, again, it's an individual thing. And I'm just sharing the way it works for me. So I hope that helps, Elaine.
Thank you. I love that answer. And we have another question. I know universal mind is also defined as spirit or energy. So do you believe our mind is infinite? And that's from Hellman.
I couldn't quite hear the whole question, Bonnie.
Okay, let me try again. Can you hear me?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
I know universal mind is also defined as spirit or energy. So do you believe our mind is infinite?
Yes, I do. I believe that the universal mind, which is, to me, that's your true essence, it's everything. And I believe that we're all part of that true essence, that energy of the universe. And so if that's true, it is infinite. And it's our little thoughts, that aren't infinite. They just keep changing from one thing to another. But underneath that, like it's like the ocean, like in the depths of the ocean, there's that calm, and it's only on the surface that there's the ripples, and that's like our thoughts. They're just totally on the surface, and they're like guesswork. Everything we think is conjecture. We're making it up in the moment. And so, but that universal mind, which is that pool of all the energy of the universe, we can just relax back into that when our mind quiets, and at that point I do believe that we're part of the infinite, and we are anyway, again, but I believe that, and that's a beautiful point that she made. Like in a way, that caller was answering her question. I think she really feels that universal mind has no beginning and no end. And when we even get just a glimmer of that, it takes away all the compelling, distracting kind of feelings that we get every day, because it's so important. What this person said to me is so important, and what I have to do to get done is so important. But when we quiet down and we get that sense of universal mind and infinity, we realize that we're making that up, that the reality is always, the reality underlying the experience of life is always that beauty, and that and beauty is infinite. I really truly believe that, and that we are all in our core infinitely beautiful.
And one other question. But personal thinking is also coming from mind? Question mark.
Well, there's nowhere else it could come from, because if the source of all life is those three principles, that mind, consciousness, and thought, everything that's going on is created from there. And then when we get in the way of that beautiful source of energy, it's like, how the Native Americans talk about the circle of life, and when you're in harmony with that circle, everything's beautiful. And then you get out of harmony. In other words, you get a negative thought or an insecure thought, it throws it off. You're out of harmony. But it's still on the surface. That wisdom, universal mind, consciousness and thought never goes away. How could it ever go away? It is everything. So, and this is just me talking from my own understanding, which is this much, but I really, that's what's so beautiful, is no matter how much we get caught up in our thinking and how much we feel like we've missed it, we've blown it, we'll never get back on track, we're a bad person, no matter how much our thoughts are telling us that, if we can just trust that that's only on the surface, that the truth, absolute truth, is that we all are that beautiful spiritual essence, all of us. And if we just remember that, even though we're not feeling it, if we've had a glimpse of that, we're so looked after.
And Charles wrote, it seems like you're pointing to these beautiful feelings come from a point of understanding on how our minds, thoughts work, which indicate we have a choice to choose how we want our experiences to feel joyous or not. Would you like me to repeat that? I think I read it kind of tall.
Okay, that would be good. Thanks.
It seems like you're pointing to that these beautiful feelings come from a point of understanding on how our minds, thoughts work, which indicate we have a choice to choose how we want our experiences to feel joyous or not. It's kind of a statement.
It's a great question, great statement. And I'll share a little story. Two stories. One, we worked in a place with where people were struggling. They were having therapy, and there was a model around at the time where they kept talking about choice, and so they would kind of reprimand the people that were going through therapy, and then all innocence about, you're not using your choice, look at your choice, and so it was like on a really kind of a personal thinking level. And so so we kind of would keep bringing people back to it's bigger than just, you know, what you're choosing in the moment. You got to look at the spiritual. You can't just get there by talking about choice, because they were talking about choice of thoughts, right? So the other part of the story is, one time when I was talking to Sid, and he said, I was just telling him I was just having such a beautiful experience of life, and I was thanking him and saying, you know, and he was saying, well, you don't thank me. I mean, that it's you. You're finding that beauty. But he said, just ask me any question. Well, when we have a thought and we're thinking, are we in the world? Like, is a thought really in the world of form? And he said, oh, you don't have to worry about that. He said, all you have to do is know that when you get a beautiful feeling, it's your consciousness is bringing you that beautiful feeling, and you don't have to try and hang on to it. You don't have to try and make it happen or worry whether it's going to come back. He said, all you have to know, get a beautiful feeling, it's a gift. And for some reason, now I don't know if that'll speak to anybody else, but it spoke to me because I started to see that I can't control everything in the world, you know, including my thinking. But what I can do is be grateful when I get a beautiful feeling, and not try and figure out how to make a beautiful feeling, where it comes from. Be grateful when it comes in. And what happened from that was I started to get more beautiful feelings because I was feeling more and more grateful. So I don't know if people will understand my insight on that one, but I'm telling you, it took a lot of the stress out of my life because I just started to just be more accepting of just what every day brought. And now I am getting more beautiful feelings and just feeling grateful for them and not trying to make them happen.
Thank you. I loved what you just said. We're coming to close to the end of our time, so I just wanted to see if you wanted to say anything to wrap this up.
Well, I guess that the most important thing I can say is that a quiet mind, again, like a beautiful feeling, is a gift. And that if we try and fix ourselves and think, oh my, I've got a busy mind, and we try and fix it, it's just going to make it worse. Again, like just trusting that who we really are is that beautiful, beautiful true self, that beautiful essence, and just trusting that, and not trying to fix ourselves, and just living in that feeling, and trusting what you've learned, that it will keep unfolding. We don't have to keep striving and trying too hard and trying to learn. It's more about just seeing how lucky we are to have our lives and have ourselves, and just, again, just that feeling of gratitude brings more gratitude.
That's beautiful. Thank you for that. So I want to thank everyone who was able to join us live. I apologize for anyone who had to watch this on the recording because we had some technical difficulties in the beginning getting on. I will do better next time. And I want to just remind everyone that next month is Linda Pettit on October 8th. And Jan, thank you so much. So thank you for being so generous with your time and for this beautiful talk that you shared.
Thank you, Bonnie. And I think you're doing a great job.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody out there. And thanks for those great questions.
Okay.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.